I am absolutely honored and pleased to welcome and to introduce two gentlemen whose bios are not in your folder because I think we know them. Matt Galloway from Metro Morning is joining us to lead a conversation with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thanks. Which side do you want? This side here. Actually, you go on this side. I'll take that side. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, glad to be here.
I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about the fact that we're here at a conference that's focused on the future of social policy, but also looking ahead. And if you take a look at the future, we'll do that in a moment. Look back for a moment. What do you think, if you take the last 25 years or so, the most important bit of social policy in this country has been?
Last 25 years, but the last 23 years don't count? Is that the, no, I think obviously what we've seen over the past generation has been a greater degree of not just this wanting and thinking that it would be nice if everyone had real opportunities to succeed, but we've seen the hard data and the policy evidence and the justification that demonstrates that when you give more people better opportunities, everyone does better. And that's where I feel over the past 2 years we've been, as a government and as Canadians, incredibly fortunate to have been able to get the support of thinkers like there are in this room and obviously of the Caledon Institute to actually say, no, if you do this, good things will happen to the whole of the economy. And quite frankly, when we first got elected 2 years ago with a plan where we hadn't, because you're the third party, you don't get the support of all the civil servants who are working for the government. We reached out to a whole bunch of experts across civil society, including Caledon Institute, obviously. And they said, well, these are the things you should do. And when we got to Ottawa and said, well, these are the things we're going to do, a whole bunch of people within finance and within the government said, well, yeah, no, that's not the way to grow the economy. And we said, well, yes, it is, and we're going to do this. Well, okay, but it's not going to have the results you want. Anyway, we did these kinds of things, and not only did it have the results we had hoped for, it's going faster than we did by putting money in the pockets of the people who need it and being, meaningfully moving the dial in terms of helping people. The benefits are tremendous.
Social policy is interesting because it can work and it can be successful or viewed positively in the moment. History can look back on it and say, we got it wrong and we've made a huge mistake. In the context of where you were on Friday and what you're going to be doing tomorrow with a couple of major apologies, I'm wondering what you think the biggest mistake when it comes to social policy is in the last 25 years or so. What have we got wrong in this country?
We've got it pretty good in Canada. In contrast to our neighbors, perhaps in some ways, we've avoided a lot of some of the social tensions that other people have had, or they've been placed in different orders, different places, and that has led to sometimes a kind of complacency that leads to blind spots. When we compare ourselves to some of the very real challenges that our nearest neighbors are struggling with, whether it be around race, whether it be around poverty, we all remember the videos of Katrina, we can sort of sit back and say, oh, you know what, at least in Canada we're doing pretty well. And that's not true. And it's certainly not true for everyone. And being much more aware of people living with systemic and real challenges and vulnerabilities, whether it be racialized communities, whether it be Indigenous peoples, of course, or whether it be just people falling through the cracks, I don't think there has been enough attention paid to the voiceless who haven't been doing very well. And don't get noticed because they're voiceless. And I think that's something that all of us are working hard to turn around, but we have a long way to go still.
There's a big announcement, tomorrow, in terms of an apology to members of the LGBT community who were in the military, who were discriminated against and more because of who they are. What do you want what you say tomorrow to say it about us as a nation?
I think there's a really interesting and important discussion to have around apologies and around ills of the past. And certainly a number of people are highlighted, and I have this reflection as well, that my father might have had a different perspective on it than I do. He came at it as an academic, as a constitutionalist. I come at it as a teacher, as someone who's worked a lot in communities. And the apologies for things past are important to make sure that we actually understand and know and share and don't repeat those mistakes. That's why a big piece of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission asked us to ensure that we were changing school curricula so students actually get, non-Aboriginal students across the country get the right kind of education about this. But apologies are also really important to be able to move forward in a healing way that acknowledges the very real intergenerational impacts or impacts on an individual around mental health, around self-worth, around how you fit into your community. I mean, for me, it comes back to that question of, well, why do we still feel it important for politicians to march in gay pride parades, for example? It's still important. There is still so much discrimination that recognizing it will make a big difference, and it will also help a whole bunch of people who would never have to, hopefully wouldn't have to go through in their future careers the kind of discrimination that happened in the past decades, but also remind everyone else that we do have to change mindsets.
You last week released this plan for the National Housing Strategy, and this is something that people in this room have been calling for a long time, and people are very happy about. You said that housing is a right. What does that mean when you say housing is a right?
Well, first of all, housing as a right is something that Canada has agreed to under certain governments in international fora for many, many years. We understand in the way my friend Adam Vaughan talks about it all the time is housing is not a problem, it's a solution. It's a building block. It's a way to solve challenges around poverty, around exclusion, around mental health, around addiction, around economic opportunity, around education. Like all these things come together. And recognizing a rights-based approach to housing fundamentally for me weaves it into those fundamental things that a society needs to make sure that its citizens have access to in order to be a full and free and really successful society in any way, shape, or form. So recognizing housing as a right folds it in, or recognizing a rights-based approach to housing looks at all the different determinants, all the different aspects of it, and recognizes that in order to solve for that rights-based approach, we do have to tackle poverty. We do have to tackle homelessness. We do have to do a better job with mental health. We do have to do a better job with poverty and raising kids in low-income households. We do have to do a better job around things like public transit and make sure that you can get to an affordable neighborhood from the job that you just got in a way that works. I mean, these are the kinds of things that all fold together, and putting a rights-based approach to it means that it is an obligation for governments to engage with it. And we can't just sort of shrug it off and say, well, if we make sure that the economy is growing and people have an opportunity, housing will take care of itself. No, it needs an active engagement and an active sense of responsibility by different orders of government in order to address it.
Would you add it to the Charter?
I think that's... I could go to my easy, I'm not opening the Constitution, that's a real mess in order to do that. But I think that's a conversation that people should have a decade from now, a few decades from now. I think we have...
Why a few decades?
Because I think what it actually means and what the impact on society and how we actually shape creating enough housing stock. I mean, right now, if someone were to say, I have a right to housing, a government could say, I have a lovely 3-bedroom apartment for you, but I know you live in Toronto. It's just you're going to have to move to Miramichi or to Saskatoon or to some other part of the country. Recognizing it as a right and leaving it at that is not actually the solution. Recognizing it as a system of which it is an essential part is a big piece of it. But if you're going to start adding rights to the Charter, there's a whole list of things that various people have talked for. Property rights on the one hand, on one side of the political spectrum, environmental rights, clean water on the other side, things that we agree absolutely need rights-based approach. But I'm not going near opening up the Constitution.
I ask in part just because the concern from some people is an announcement as powerful as the one may have been last week, and with as much money attached to it, people worry about political timelines, and they worry about the fact that you can make a commitment now, but how do you ensure that social policy survives the churn of government?
Well, a big piece of it is enshrining it as a rights-based piece of legislation and an aspect that, whether it's creating a third-party oversight mechanism or an ombudsperson to ensure that we're moving in the right direction and continuing to do so, elevating the discourse so this is the kind of conversation we have, so no future government can sort of say, oh, well, it's more of a provincial area of responsibility, so we're going to step back like the last government did. I think the other big thing is it's easy to change a big dump of money into one single grand gesture. It's harder to change incremental but meaningful, substantial process that happens over time. And the one thing that we wanted to ensure that we have is guaranteeing that the money is there over a long horizon. Because that's what we've heard from provinces, whether they'll talk about healthcare accords or infrastructure investments. Provinces, municipalities, organizations need that predictability, and that's what we've put in. The other thing is we're doing something really big and really important, and if we do want the right things to last, we got to make sure that they are built right. Because it's far easier for a government to look at a future government to look at a program that didn't work and say, well, we're canceling that. If we take the time, what everyone here understands, to make sure we're getting it absolutely right, and we're not talking about a 5 or 6 year horizon, we're talking about the next 2 years, which is going to mean an awful lot of very hard work by the types of folks, and actually the folks in this room, to make sure we're designing it exactly right to help people. Then it becomes good policy that is irreversible. I mean, for all, to use an example that Sherry and Ken helped us out so deeply on in the lead up to the election, the Canada Child Benefit. I mean, you guys will remember the campaign rhetoric from the NDP on Canada Child Benefit. It should be universal. Child benefits should be universal, and we're saying, well, no, you don't want to send child benefit checks to millionaires. And on the other hand, the Conservatives were very, very focused on their model of child benefits and argued against ours. But you don't hear anyone suggesting that they would reverse those child benefits, both because it's great policy and because it's having such a very positive impact. So when you create good policy that meaningful helps individuals and demonstrates the positive impacts on the economic frame of the country, as we've seen over the past couple of years, it becomes impossible to overturn by future governments, regardless of their ideology.
How do you square that with timelines that people have here? We did an interview on Friday on our program with a woman who was homeless for 4 years. And she said she knew that she was going to be homeless because things were falling through the cracks. And you could, if you were paying attention, you could have checked those boxes off and stopped her before she hit the bottom. Yeah. That's a problem that's happening right now in cities like this and in cities across the country. How do we deal, if there is relentless incrementalism that works down the line, how do we deal with the crisis that we're in right now?
Oh, there is money starting to flow in many ways right now. I mean, we recognize, one of the absurdities we have is when a child leaves foster care at 18, in many places you don't actually get to talk about homelessness strategy applying to them until they've experienced 6 months of homelessness. Well, by the time someone has experienced 6 months of homelessness as a 18 to 18 or 19 to 19 and a half year old, they've developed challenges and problems that are going to have echoes for the next decade, if not the rest of their lives. And being a lot smarter about how we respond quicker is something that we absolutely have to do. So it's not just about, excuse me, it's not just about getting it right. It's showing and demonstrating the willingness and the presence to work with partners right now to start making immediate differences by boosting programs that exist right now, while we get around to refurbishing or repairing 300,000 units and building 100,000 new ones, which is not going to happen overnight, but will significantly make a difference as it happens over the next year or two.
Part of this is about looking ahead 25 years. And I wanted to ask you a question. It's about a different kind of social policy, but we have seen a real change, or certainly a real conversation in the last 6 weeks, 2 months, certainly in the last little bit, about what people face at work, what people face, whether it's in the entertainment industry, whether it's in business, whether it's in the lives that they lead, what women face in particular. The success of the Me Too hashtag has been extraordinary and has led people to speak about sexual harassment in a way that perhaps they haven't felt free to otherwise. What do you make of what's happening right now? This is a policy issue for a lot of people because it's going to shape where they are and who they are. What do you make of what's happening right now when it comes to that issue?
This is where I, unlike the previous question, I float back exactly 25 years. 25 years ago this year, I was in my undergrad at McGill, and I joined the McGill Student Society Sexual Assault Center because McGill didn't need a sexual assault center because there was, of course, no sexual assault happening on campus. So there was a student society. That was the frame we were told at that point. And as parents were coming to visit, they didn't want to have a McGill Sexual Assault Center. They wanted to have a McGill Student Society doing their own sexual assault center. It was a ridiculous distinction that unfortunately in too many places still continues today. And I got to work firsthand with an issue that 25 years later we're still just sort of scratching the surface on. There is an awakening happening over these past weeks, but it has taken years and decades of activism and pushing and frustration and willfully ignoring the facts by institutions and cultures to get a change to happen. And even then, there's still so much more to do.
Well, and it's happening. We had a conversation with your employment minister, Patty Hedgew, the Labour minister, and she was talking about the Hill, Parliament Hill, and the atmosphere in Ottawa being rife for this sort of abuse. So you've dealt with allegations within your own caucus. Mm-hmm. Are there more of those, allegations that you would be dealing with, and complaints that you have been investigating?
I hope not. We have been very, very clear. I have been very, very clear. There's zero tolerance. We've done extensive training sessions and contracts signed by all members of our team, not just the MPs, but the entire culture around our political party and spreading it to having a harassment policy on the Hill. Parliament Hill is a workplace like many others, and therefore has the same kinds of challenges others have. But we also have a responsibility to lead and be a model for solving the challenges that exist elsewhere.
Do we need legislation? The legislation goes to federal workplaces, but do we need legislation? And this is a social policy piece that would protect people beyond those federal workplaces, that would say this is not acceptable. We know it's not acceptable, but would have that in legislation?
For me, legislation is a tool, and if it can be shown to be effective, but what we fundamentally need is a shift in mindset, a shift so that people realize this isn't just an issue for women in the workplace or for certain people in the workplace. This is an issue that affects all of us, and to make sure that each and every one of us is stepping up when there are comments, when there is harassment. The number of people who come out whenever there's a news about this person or that person, a whole bunch of people shrug and say, oh yeah, no, I wasn't surprised at all by that. We saw that coming for a long time. Well, why didn't you say something then? Or other people said, well, I had no idea, but we're not yet having those proactive conversations about the shifts in mindsets that need to happen. And popular culture and traditional dynamics and like everything we're surrounded with has created a structure within the patriarchal approach that we traditionally have that minimizes certain voices and gives authority or deference. Or, I remember having an argument with around a table at a global event, and I won't use any names, where one prominent person was complaining because they were on the board of some university and saying, one girl comes forward and you've ruined this young student's life for the rest of his life. And I said, well, wait a second. What about the 99 young women who don't come forward and how their lives are ruined? And the person next to me said, oh, wow, you actually really do believe the stuff you're saying. You're not just saying it because it's I'm like, oh my God, there's so much work to do to try and change mindsets within society. And I'm the first to say that I don't have all the answers, but as a leader, as a feminist, as a father of kids who are approaching teenage age with the troubling speed. A 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and there's that tween. Anyway, it's those questions and the discussions we have to have about, as I've said many times, raising my daughter to be a feminist, yes, but also raising my sons to be a feminist, and understanding power dynamics and imbalances, and the need to be there to stick up for friends who are or individuals who are being victimized or being marginalized or being harassed or bullied. This is something that we have to really, really focus on as a society. Maybe there's probably a number of legislative fixes we can move, but legislation is one angle. There are so many other ways that we need to also work to change society.
Can I end just looking ahead? You mentioned your kids. And if you think of social policy in the next 25 years, and the world that they're going to be stepping into, what is the piece of social policy that you want to see implemented to make their lives better?
Well, I think that the exciting thing is that we've started we've seen rise, and we're celebrating it today, that the next 25 years of social policy thinkers, of activists who are armed with data and proof points that are actually changing the conversation and taking back this conversation from the social side of things that's sort of nice to haves to, no, if you want to create a strong, resilient economy, you need to fold in fundamental thinking about social policy to make sure that you're creating both the confidence and the opportunities to succeed for all of our citizens. I think what we've managed to do in a certain way with our success over the past 2 years is due to all the hard work done by folks like Ken Battle to really lead the way on making a cold, hard case for something that too often gets pushed into the, lovey-dovey, nice-to-have kinds of things. And I think if there's anything that I'm looking forward to in the coming years, it'll be the further concretization of not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. I mean, that's something we talk about when you talk about getting more women onto boards or getting better diversity in an organization. But there's so many more things that we can be doing and succeeding in if we are actually looking at this through the cold, harsh light of this is the right thing to do because it's the smart thing to do, and not just because it's the progressive, give each other a hug model of building societies. That approach, I think is one of the most exciting innovations that we have, where intuitively what people feel of is the right thing to do is often, in many cases, the smart thing to do.
Prime Minister, thank you.
What a pleasure, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.